You searched and NEI's experts answered. Here, NEI faculty answer the web's most searched questions on mental health concerns. Hi, I'm Dr. Andy Cutler, Chief Medical Officer of the Neuroscience Education Institute, and here with me today is my good friend, Dr. David Goodman from Johns Hopkins. How are you, David?
Hey, Andy. How are you? Thanks for having me.
You bet. We're really looking forward to talking about ADHD. All right, David, well, let's get started. First of all, does ADHD get worse with age? That's something you know a little bit about.
I do. One of my specialties is ADHD in older adults over the age of 50. People recognize very little about this. I published the first literature review on this in 2016, so that's already 7 years ago, and now people are starting to talk about it. Does it get worse? It doesn't get worse in the sense that the disease state itself doesn't change. What changes are the impairments that are a function of the environment. So as you get older, people will say, well, you don't really have much to do in your retirement, and yet somebody like you and I, who are supposed to be retired, are still pretty busy, as well as the people watching this. You have paperwork, you have bank accounts, you're still working. There's a lot of responsibilities. So impairments get worse, and people experience that. Also, as you get older, your cognitive ability declines, and so you're pedaling twice as hard to keep up with how you used to work when you were younger. So the short answer is, and we tend not to speak in short answers because you and I are acquainted with that. Yeah, a little verbose. The short answer is no, it doesn't get worse, but it does persist into older years.
Yeah, and sometimes too, frustrations mount, and the effect on your self-image, your self-esteem can also be an issue as you get older too, I guess.
People are diagnosed at different ages. Most of ADHD is associated with getting diagnosed as a kid. But if you're in your 50s and 60s, you may be getting diagnosed for the first time, and it's not part of the diagnostic criteria that you have been diagnosed as a child. So 100% of the older adults with ADHD were never diagnosed as a child.
Isn't that interesting?
It's really interesting.
And also the financial complications as you get older. People with ADHD don't do so well with money sometimes.
Right. The other diagnostic issue is if you go into your primary care doctor or your nurse practitioner and say, I'm having difficulties with my focus, concentration, and memory, if you're in your 50s or 60s, they may easily discount it as age-related, and they're not looking for, because they haven't been trained to look for ADHD in older adults.
Yeah, and don't a lot of them say, I think I have Alzheimer's?
Correct. And they're very reassured when they don't.
Yes.
Some of them do have mild cognitive impairment, which is an increase in cognitive difficulty, but it's not dementia.
Okay.
And it may be ADHD.
You got it. Well, let's do the next one here. Does ADHD make you forgetful? Did you forget what you wanted to say?
I even forgot that I knew the question. Does it make you forgetful? You will experience forgetfulness.
Absolutely.
Now, let's make a distinction between ADHD and ordinary forgetfulness. We all misplace our phones, our keys, our wallets, and paperwork, but that doesn't make ADHD. ADHD is a chronic disorder since childhood. The forgetfulness is problematic. It's not just that you forget a piece of information, but if you forget where your car is in a parking lot, you can spend days looking for it. If you forget that you paid your taxes and you pay your taxes again, now you have a problem trying to get that money back. So being forgetful during the day is problematic. It's also frustrating.
Yes.
People really don't want to be forgetful, but being forgetful isn't something you choose to do.
I notice I've had a lot of people who worry a lot. They worry, oh my God, am I going to forget this? Or I tend to forget things. It is a problem with something we call working memory. Having ADHD doesn't mean you're globally cognitively impaired. It tends to hit certain cognitive aspects more than others, and one of them is working memory.
The other aspect of this, though, is that people don't understand this. They see being forgetful as not caring or lazy.
Yes.
And other people then assign to you a motivation that's not true. And that interferes with the nature of your relationship with people. If you're forgetful and inconsistent, then people move away from you because they can't depend on you. When your ADHD is treated and your cognition is better and you're able to function more consistently, people move towards you. So this coming and going of people in your lives really has an effect on the quality of your life.
Absolutely. So these symptoms can affect your relationships even. All right. Does ADHD Only affect kids. Wow, that's something you know a little bit about too.
Well, it affects kids, but it affects everybody who has
Excellent.
ADHD. We know from some of the studies that
That's right.
60 to 90% of kids with ADHD will continue to have it. So
Yeah.
this is not a cold that's going to go away in 3 weeks, and the stimulants won't make it all better. It's
Yeah.
pills and skills.
Yeah.
And so you approach it, Andy, you approach this as a chronic illness. You're
Yes.
not going to grow out of your ADHD, and it's not
Hmm.
going to be cured,
Hmm.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
So we counsel people that this can be lifelong.
Yeah.
And let's look at your strengths as well.
Yeah.
There is a very famous business person, Peter Drucker, who used to
Mm.
say,
Yeah.
invest in opportunities,
Hmm.
not in your problems. And so
Okay.
I think psychiatry tends to focus on let's try to make the shortcomings better.
Yeah.
And I believe in therapy, we ought to focus on capitalizing on your strengths.
I love that because when people come to see us often, they have been told that they're lazy or stupid and they've had a lot of failures or frustrations. And so their self esteem takes a big hit. And realizing that they do have strengths, and actually, there's some things the ADHD brain does particularly well, and there's some qualities associated with ADHD: enthusiasm, impulsivity in the right situations. When I trained David, there was no such thing as adult ADHD. I was literally trained you outgrow it, which never made sense to me. This is highly genetic, neurologic wiring problem you can demonstrate on neuroimaging. There's no other example of something that goes away like that. Now, you mentioned some newer research that's really helpful. Says that, yeah, the majority of the time it persists, but for a lot of people, it can wax or wane, at least the impairments, and depending on your environment, stressors, your coping skills.
So we have to be careful with that literature from Maggie Sibley.
Yes,
It does wax and wane.
yes.
It's not that the disorder is
No,
changing.
right.
It's that the environmental demands
Exactly.
are highlighting the
Exactly.
impairments. And so part of the therapy is
Mhm.
managing your environment,
I
trying
agree.
not to get into a job with a lot of interrupts and high demands and deadlines.
Yeah.
And so you want to find a job or a environment that works with your ADHD, which goes to the next point. You want to work with the people in this person's life.
Hmm.
So if you're married and you have a spouse,
Hmm.
it's not that he's doing this to you, it's
Yes.
something that he is suffering with.
Yes.
Let me talk to you about how to communicate with this
That's
person
right.
in a more productive way.
And you mentioned something earlier. It's not that they don't care. It's they have some impairments, and maybe in listening or remembering or that kind of thing. Great. Okay. Does ADHD only affect boys?
Does it only affect boys? No, it doesn't only affect boys. Boys are diagnosed as children because they're disruptive
Hmm.
and they're disruptive to others. Interesting in the diagnosis here, when you're a child, you'll get diagnosed because your behavior is a problem to other people.
Hmm.
As you get older,
Hmm.
you seek out help because your behavior and cognition is a problem for you
Wow.
or for someone else in the environment
Hmm.
because you can't act consistently.
Hmm.
So boys get diagnosed at a ratio of 2 to 1, 3 to 1. And
Hmm.
then as we move up older,
Hmm.
it's 1.5 to 1.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a little bit more in boys,
Yeah.
but also in girls. There's two things
Hmm.
about girls, though. It's often said that girls aren't diagnosed because they're not disruptive.
Hmm.
It's inattention, distractibility, and
Hmm.
disorganization.
Hmm.
But I will offer another provocative thought about this,
All right.
and that there may be a gender bias.
Hmm.
That is, girls and women are often told that they're anxious and depressed.
Hmm.
And did you know that girls with ADHD are more often started on antidepressants than boys who have ADHD?
That is fascinating. I did not know that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to think about your gender bias when
Right.
you diagnose and sit with women and
That's
not
right.
so easily discount that this is anxiety, depression, that this is an emotional woman, and
Right.
the
Right.
cognition is either secondary to the
Yes.
anxiety, depression,
Yeah.
or it's not really as
Hmm.
paramount as they complain.
Yeah. And again, when I was trained, we really were trained it was more common in boys. And it could be because some of the early criteria was written for hyperactive boys. And so you miss people who don't have that. Okay, finally, does ADHD need stimulant medication?
So the short answer to that would be no.
Yeah.
If you know you have ADHD, if this is how you want to experience your world and your life,
Hmm.
you don't need medication.
Hmm.
You're not going to function as well.
Right.
You're likely not going to finish high school or
Hmm.
college
Hmm.
or have stable employment.
Hmm.
You're more likely to get into substance and alcohol abuse.
Hmm.
Interesting point about adolescent girls. They're almost 10 times more likely to get pregnant.
Mm.
They're more likely to have STDs.
Wow.
Now, think about the second order of pregnancy.
Hmm.
If you're getting pregnant between the ages of 15 and 19, where do you think you're going after you get told you're pregnant? Those are the women who end up at the abortion clinics. And so an interesting study would be to look at those teenage girls who are showing up at abortion clinics and how many of them have ADHD. So there are several orders of effect here.
That's right.
And ADHD often gets diminished by people who say, well, I'm forgetful and distracted. And so, why are you making this a big deal? Now you come back to the stimulants. You and I have been doing this for now decades. It's interesting. The audience probably doesn't know this, but between you and I, we have over 70 years of clinical and research experience. That's extraordinary.
Yes. For guys so young, we started in junior high, though, that's why.
Yeah, that's true. And in our 40s, we still have a lot of career to go.
Yeah.
But stimulants are very effective. They have the highest effect size. That means the largest magnitude of improvement of any psychiatric medication.
Isn't that something?
It is. So there are two disorders. You know this. There are two disorders that you can treat in an hour. Panic disorder by giving a benzodiazepine, and ADHD by giving a stimulant medication. Now, do you need to be on stimulant medication? No. But if I put you on a stimulant medication and you see how your cognitive ability is, you now have a comparative experience of how you want to live your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a quality of life issue.
It certainly is. So I guess what we're saying is you don't have to be on medication, number one, although for most people with ADHD, medication is extremely effective and would be seen as foundational therapy. Number two, if you're on medication, you don't have to be on a stimulant. There are some non-stimulant options. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, the effect size is not as great. So it's trade-off, right? But it's also very important to realize that there are things you can do in addition to medicine. Now, one of the analogies I like to use is nobody would question me for giving them insulin if they had diabetes. But yet people all the time do that with stimulants, and I understand some of the reasons. Well, David, this has been fascinating. I hope it's been helpful to you in the audience, and stay tuned for more such episodes.